Hello. Write in the comments where you're from. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Enjoy listening. Jessica's husband said he had an urgent business trip, but instead he was celebrating his birthday with his mistress at a hotel in Chicago. But Jessica secretly brought the whole family there for a surprise, including his parents and uncles. When they knocked on the door of his room with a cake, the mistress opened it wearing only a towel. What his mother did next was heard throughout the entire hotel. But before all this happened, before the silence of the expensive hotel was shattered by a scream, there was one phone call. A short, businesslike, almost innocent call that changed everything. Jessica was sitting in her office at the furniture factory her father had built. She was staring at the figures in the report, but not seeing them. Her mind replayed Nathan's words, her husband's words, spoken that morning. An urgent business trip, Jessica. Partners from Detroit flew in, a meeting in Chicago. I'll even have to spend my birthday there, can you imagine? But it's for our future. He said it so convincingly, looking into her eyes, that for a second she almost believed him. Almost. But something inside her, some cold knot in her stomach, had not loosened for months. She knew the name of the hotel where he was supposedly meeting his partners. Grand Palace. He had casually dropped that name himself. And now, staring at the phone, Jessica made a decision. She would no longer sit in doubt. She had to know. Her finger pressed the buttons, dialing the hotel's number. Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat. Grand Palace, good afternoon, answered a polite female voice. Jessica made her voice as official, as cold as possible. Good afternoon. I'm Nathan Harrison's assistant. He asked me to check if everything is ready for his event tomorrow in the conference hall. She held her breath. It was a trap. If he was there on business, he should have booked a hall. The girl on the other end was silent for a moment, checking something. One moment. Harrison. No, we don't have a conference hall booked under that name. Mr. Harrison is staying in Suite 712. But no events have been registered. That was it. There it was. The cold knot in Jessica's stomach turned into a block of ice. He wasn't working. He was just there. Alone. In a suite. On his birthday. The thought was so obvious, so vulgar, so humiliating that Jessica felt the blood rush to her cheeks. She thanked her and hung up. For several minutes she just sat, staring at the wall. Pain, resentment, rage, all blended into one tight lump. She could have called him, started a fight over the phone. She could have just packed up and left. But that would be too easy. Too quiet. She remembered how he had looked at her that morning, how he had lied to her face. And she wanted not just to expose him, but to force him to look not only into her eyes, but into the eyes of his entire family. The family he valued so much in words. And then a plan formed in her mind. Bold, desperate, a little insane. She would not let him quietly celebrate his birthday with another woman. She would give him a real celebration. One he would never forget. First, she called her mother-in-law, Elizabeth Harrison. Elizabeth, hello. I have wonderful news for you and one big request. Jessica spoke quickly, with feigned enthusiasm. She told a made-up story about Nathan secretly signing a huge contract that would save their family business, and that he was modestly sitting in a Chicago hotel, not wanting any glory. He thinks he'll spend his birthday alone, working. But now we'll all get together, you, Richard, Uncle Charles with Aunt Helen, and surprise him. Can you imagine his face? Elizabeth gasped with delight on the other end of the line. Her darling boy, her brilliant son, saving everyone once again. She adored the idea of a surprise. Jessica, you're wonderful to think of this. Of course we'll go. I'll call everyone right away. My boy deserves a celebration. An hour later, Jessica's family minivan was already waiting at the gates of their country house. She got behind the wheel herself. On the back seats the relatives were chattering noisily. Elizabeth, glowing with pride for her son. Richard, Nathan's father, as always silent and serious, but with approval in his eyes. Uncle Charles was already anticipating how they would celebrate his nephew's success. Jessica gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her hands were icy. She felt like the director of a play that was about to begin. All the way to Chicago, she listened to Elizabeth's ecstatic speeches about how wonderful her son was, how devoted to his family and the business. Every word Elizabeth spoke lashed Jessica's strained nerves like a whip. On the way, they stopped at the best pastry shop, and Jessica bought a large cake with the inscription, "Happy Birthday, our hero." She carried that box herself, and it felt to her like she was carrying not a cake, but a ticking time bomb. And there was the Grand Palace Hotel. A luxurious lobby, silence, marble gleaming. Jessica confidently led the entire procession to the elevator. The relatives whispered to each other, anticipating the surprise. "And what's the room number?" Richard asked. 712, Jessica replied evenly, her voice steady. They went up to the 7th floor. A long carpeted corridor. The silence was deafening. There was the door they needed. Room 712. "All right, everyone quiet," Elizabeth whispered, fixing her hair. "Jessica, give me the cake. I'll hand it over." A mother should be the first to congratulate her son. But Jessica didn't hand over the box. She stepped forward. "No, let me. I'm his wife, after all." She set the cake box down on the floor at her feet, took a deep breath, gathering all her willpower, and knocked. 3 short, distinct raps of her knuckles on the dark wood. There were footsteps behind the door. The lock clicked. The door opened. On the threshold stood a petite, slim young woman. She wore nothing but a white terry towel loosely wrapped around her body. Her hair was damp, and a lazy, satisfied smile played on her face, until it instantly vanished when she saw the whole delegation in the hallway. Behind Jessica, absolute, dead silence fell. Chuckles and whispers were cut off mid-breath. Jessica could hear her own heart pounding. She stared at this woman, at her bare shoulders, at the drop of water running down her collarbone, and felt nothing but cold, ringing emptiness. "What's going on here?" came Nathan's irritated voice from inside the room. And a moment later he appeared behind the stranger. He too wore nothing but a towel wrapped around his hips. Seeing his entire family frozen in the hallway, and his wife standing in the center, he froze. Panic flashed across his face, quickly replaced by cold fury. No one said a word. Time seemed to stop. Uncle Charles opened his mouth, then closed it again. Richard turned pale and lowered his eyes, as if ashamed of his son. But Jessica's gaze was fixed on her mother-in-law. Elizabeth shifted her eyes from her half-naked son to the stranger, then to Jessica. Her face, glowing with pride just a minute ago, twisted. But not with anger at Nathan. All the fury, all the contempt, all the hatred in her eyes were directed at Jessica. She looked at her daughter-in-law as if Jessica were the one standing before her in a towel. As if she were the one who had betrayed and disgraced the whole family. Jessica wanted to say something, to open her mouth, but she didn't get the chance. Elizabeth let out a piercing, heartbreaking scream that echoed down the entire floor. But it was not a cry of rage or accusation. It was a cry of pain. She clutched her chest, her eyes rolled back. "My heart," she rasped. After a theatrical pause, she collapsed onto the carpet, right at Jessica's feet. It all happened in an instant. The scene of betrayal turned into a scene of tragedy. Nathan, forgetting his state of dress, rushed into the hallway, shouting, "Mom!" Everyone panicked, rushing to Elizabeth. But Jessica remained standing still, staring at her fallen mother-in-law and at the ridiculous cake box at her feet. And in that moment she understood clearly, she had just been outplayed. Her righteous anger, her humiliation, her pain, all erased. In the eyes of her husband's family, she had gone from a betrayed wife to a cruel schemer who had driven her mother-in-law to a heart attack. The commotion around her felt like a silent film. People running, someone shouting, Uncle Charles dashing down the corridor, trying to explain something to the bewildered hotel staff. Jessica stood rooted to the spot. Movement, sound, panic, all belonged to another reality. In hers there was only her mother-in-law lying on the floor, the cake box, and Nathan's face, twisted with fake worry and real, icy rage directed straight at her. The girl in the towel, Monica, had long disappeared back into the room. Smart girl. She had played her part and exited the stage. Now the lead actor was Nathan. He knelt beside his mother, checking her pulse, shouting at the hotel manager who had come running. An ambulance? Did you call an ambulance? She has a bad heart. God, Mom, Mommy. No one looked at Jessica with sympathy. Aunt Helen shook her head, lips pressed tight. Uncle Charles shot her one short, condemning glance and turned away. In their eyes she was a monster. The one who had dragged them here for some cruel, incomprehensible game, and this was the result. The doctors arrived. They surrounded Elizabeth efficiently, began asking questions. Nathan, now in a robe, answered for everyone. Severe stress. Shock. We just wanted to celebrate my birthday, and my wife turned it into this nightmare. He said the word wife as if it were a curse. When they placed Elizabeth on the stretcher, she opened her eyes for a moment. Her gaze was hazy, but it found Jessica in the crowd. There was no pain in it. Only cold, heavy triumph. And in that moment Jessica understood completely, something was wrong here. It was all too smooth. Too perfect. Nathan straightened up and walked over to her. He didn't shout. He spoke quietly, in a hissing whisper, so only she could hear. Satisfied? Is this what you wanted? If anything happens to her, I will destroy you. Then he turned to a bewildered Richard. Dad, go to the hospital with Mom. I'll sort things out here and come. And her. He nodded at Jessica. Get her out of here. I don't want to see her. Richard, her father-in-law, came up to her. His face was gray, tired. He didn't accuse, but he didn't defend her either. Jessica, go home. Please. There's nothing you can do here. She nodded silently. She had no strength to resist, and no reason. She turned and walked down the long corridor to the elevator, feeling dozens of condemning eyes on her back. She was alone. Absolutely alone. All the way back to their suburban community she drove on autopilot. The car was filled with the smell of vanilla and sponge cake from the cake forgotten at the hotel. The smell of a failed celebration. A failed humiliation. She didn't return to the house she shared with Nathan, but to his parents' house next door. She went in, walked to the living room, and sat in an armchair. To wait. About 3 hours passed. The house was empty and quiet. Then she heard a car pull up. Richard came in. He looked 10 years older. He silently poured himself a glass of water, downed it, and only then looked at her. They kept her in the hospital for a couple of days. Under observation. Her blood pressure spiked, a severe spasm. The doctor said, just a bit more and it could have been a heart attack. Nathan is with her. He paused, choosing his words. Jessica, I don't know what happened between you two, and I probably don't want to know. But this won't do. Do you understand what you've done? Why did you stage this circus? The cold rage that had slumbered beneath the shock began to awaken. A circus? And your son celebrating his birthday with a mistress in a luxury suite, that's not a circus, Richard. He sighed and looked away. That's between you and him. But dragging his mother into it, she worships him. For her, this is a blow. You need to go to the hospital and apologize. To her and to Nathan. For the sake of peace in the family. There it was. The key words. For the sake of peace in the family. A peace always bought at the price of her silence, her concessions. No, Jessica said firmly. I won't apologize for telling the truth. And I don't believe her. What do you mean, don't believe her? Her father-in-law frowned. Her fainting. It was fake. Too theatrical. Too well-timed. Richard looked at her with bitter disappointment. Jessica, stop. You're saying terrible things right now. The woman is in the hospital, and you're looking for some trick. You've crossed the line. He turned and went upstairs, leaving her alone in the vast, muffled living room. Now she knew for sure. No one would believe her. Her word against the heroic mother's heart attack. But suspicion had already turned into certainty. She had to find proof. She had to. She took out her phone. A name surfaced in her mind, Michael. A guy from their town who had gotten into trouble a few years back, and Jessica, using her father's connections, had helped him get a job in the security service of a large Chicago company that happened to service a chain of hotels, including the Grand Palace. She hadn't seen him since, but she still had his number. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the buttons. "Yes," answered a voice that had grown unfamiliar over the years. "Michael, hi. It's Jessica Harrison. Do you remember me?" There was a pause on the other end. "Jessica, yes, of course I remember. What can I do for you?" "I need a favor. Very urgent and very unofficial. I need footage from the surveillance camera in the 7th floor corridor of the Grand Palace Hotel. From today. An hour's worth, roughly from 5 to 6 in the evening." Michael fell silent again. "Jessica, you know that's impossible, right? That's proprietary information. People get fired on the spot for that." "I'll pay, Michael," Jessica said quickly. "I'll pay well. Whatever you say. I need this, it's a matter of life and death." She could hear him breathing into the receiver, thinking. She had gone all in. "All right," he said finally. $10,000. And you never called me. I'll send the file to your email in an hour. Give me the address." Jessica dictated the email and hung up. Her heart was pounding. $10,000 for a minute-long video. But if her hunch was right, it would be worth every cent. She went back to her house, opened her laptop, and waited. It was the longest hour of her life. She stared at the empty screen, and the hallway scene played over and over in her mind. At last a new email notification arrived. From an anonymous sender. Inside was a single link to a file-sharing service. She downloaded the video. The file opened in a player. Black and white, grainy footage without sound. There she was with the family stepping out of the elevator. There she was knocking on the door. The door opened, and the girl in the towel appeared. Nathan came out. Everything as she remembered it. The relatives' faces frozen in shock. And then the climax. Elizabeth clutched her chest and theatrically collapsed onto the carpet. Right on cue. The family rushed to her. Nathan, Richard, Uncle Charles. They surrounded her, bustling about, completely blocking her body from the camera's lens. For several seconds the video showed only a flurry of backs and legs. Jessica was about to close the video, disappointed. Nothing new. But her finger froze on the mouse. She forced herself to keep watching, and then it happened. Uncle Charles recoiled for a second, apparently pulling out his phone to call an ambulance. In the gap that opened between him and Nathan's back, as he bent over his mother, Elizabeth's face was visible for a fraction of a second. It wasn't contorted with pain. Her head was slightly lifted off the floor. Her eyes were open. And those eyes were looking straight at her son. And then, clearly, plainly, without any doubt, Elizabeth winked at him. A quick, conspiratorial, triumphant flick of the eyelid. And then her head dropped back onto the carpet, and she once again became the hapless victim. Jessica exhaled sharply, as if punched in the diaphragm. She rewound the recording. Played that moment again. And again. In slow motion. Frame by frame. No mistake. No trick of light and shadow. It was a distinct, deliberate gesture. A signal, cold spread through her veins. This wasn't just a lie. It was a conspiracy. A play directed by Nathan and his mother to cast her, Jessica, as the monster and seize the initiative. Her humiliation had been merely a pretext. The real goal lay elsewhere. And it wasn't a feint. It was a declaration of war. Jessica snapped the laptop shut so hard the plastic cracked. The loud click sliced through the silence of the empty house. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Icy, crystal clear fury pushed out every other feeling. She stood, took her car keys and her phone. There was no fuss in her movements. Only a cold, calculated purpose. She knew which hospital Elizabeth was in. Nathan never skimped on displays of care, so it was the best private clinic in the city. The drive took 20 minutes. For 20 minutes she drove through dark streets, seeing nothing but the road ahead, with only one thought in her mind: she would show her this video. She would force her to look her in the eye. The clinic's lobby smelled of medicine and calm. A polite girl at the desk informed her that Elizabeth Harrison was in room 305, but visiting hours were over. Jessica didn't argue. She simply gave the girl a look so sharp that the girl lowered her eyes and said nothing as Jessica walked past her to the elevator. 3rd floor. A quiet corridor. A duty nurse sat by the door to room 305. Harrison can't have visitors, she's resting, exhausted, the woman said. Jessica silently took a $100 bill from her wallet and placed it on the table in front of the nurse. I need 5 minutes. I'm her daughter-in-law. The nurse looked at the money, then at Jessica. She sighed, slipped the bill into her pocket, and turned back to her logbook. The way was clear. Jessica quietly eased the door open. The room was single occupancy, the light subdued. Elizabeth wasn't asleep. She sat half reclined on high pillows, leafing with interest through a glossy magazine. A tray with an almost untouched dinner stood on the nightstand. She looked perfectly healthy. A bit tired, perhaps, but certainly not dying. Hearing the door creak, she raised her head. Seeing Jessica, she didn't look surprised. She set the magazine aside and regarded her with cold, watchful curiosity. Come to finish me off? She asked calmly. Jessica closed the door behind her without a word. She walked up to the bed. Her hands didn't shake. She unlocked her phone, found the video file, and held it out to her mother-in-law. Just watch, she said quietly. Elizabeth took the phone. She squinted, bringing the screen closer to her face. For several seconds she watched the small, grainy image in silence. She saw everything: the bustle in the corridor, the panic on people's faces, her son and husband bending over her. And then she saw herself. She saw that very moment. She saw her triumphant, conspiratorial wink aimed at Nathan. She watched to the end. Then, just as silently, she handed the phone back to Jessica. Not a muscle twitched on her face. No shame, no remorse, no fear. Nothing. And so what? She asked, adjusting the pillow. Jessica was momentarily paralyzed by such brazenness. She had expected anything: denial, shouting, excuses. But not this icy, indifferent calm. What? Jessica repeated, feeling everything boil inside. You deceived everyone. You staged a performance. You almost made me into a murderer. I did what I had to, Elizabeth replied in an even voice. I will always protect my son. Always. From anyone. And from anything. Especially from hysterical and foolish antics. She looked straight at Jessica, and there was steel in her eyes. You thought you would humiliate him? Shame him in front of the whole family? You miscalculated, girl. I would have died for real if that were necessary to protect him. And you're just an obstacle. Those words struck harder than a slap. Jessica realized that arguing with this woman, appealing to her conscience, was pointless. She had no conscience. Only a blind, all-consuming love for her son. Then Elizabeth changed tactics. Her voice grew softer, almost sympathetic. Jessica, let's not make this complicated. This marriage is already dead anyway, you understand that, don't you? You and Nathan are different people. It happens. I want to make you an offer. For the sake of peace. For the sake of the past, which did have good things in it. She spoke like a wise, caring mother. We are prepared to pay you a very generous severance. You'll get enough money to go wherever you want, start a new life, buy an apartment in New York, travel, whatever you wish. In return, a quiet, quick divorce and, of course, you transfer your share in the factory to Nathan. It's his business, his legacy. It will be right for everyone. Jessica listened, and a wave rose in her, not rage now, but bitter, icy contempt. They wanted to buy her. To throw her out of her own life, out of the business her father had built, paying for her silence. Are you out of your mind? She breathed. You think you can buy my life? My honor? My father's factory? For any amount of money? I will not leave. I will not give you a cent, not an inch of what rightfully belongs to me. Elizabeth's face hardened again. The mask of the caring mother-in-law vanished. As you wish, she said coldly. I tried the nice way. That means you leave us no choice. She sat up straight on the bed, her gaze heavy, piercing. You cling to the factory, silly girl, but do you even know what's really happening? You're our operations director, you're proud of that. Are you aware that your beloved factory is on its last legs? That we're on the brink of bankruptcy? Jessica froze. That couldn't be. She controlled production, expenses. Yes, the last 6 months had been hard, sales had fallen, but bankruptcy was a long way off. That's a lie, she said with certainty. A lie? Elizabeth smirked. Open your eyes. Look at the real numbers, not the pretty reports my son feeds you. We have huge debts. Suppliers are threatening lawsuits. Another month or two, and it all collapses. And your father, and I, and our entire family will be out on the street. She paused, letting her words sink into Jessica's mind. And the only one who can save us all is Nathan. He has a plan. He has an investor ready to put in huge money and pull us out of this hole. He spent weeks on this, negotiating, while you sat in your office thinking you were in control. Jessica listened, and the ground slipped from under her feet. Debts, bankruptcy, a mysterious savior, it sounded like madness. But Elizabeth spoke with such icy certainty that doubts began to creep into her soul. And what does any of this have to do with it? Jessica asked, nodding toward the door where that hotel, that girl, still lingered in memory. Elizabeth looked at her with open pity, like at a slow child who doesn't grasp the obvious. You still haven't understood? She gave a bitter little laugh. That girl at the hotel, Monica. She's not just his mistress. She's our only chance. Jessica stared at her, uncomprehending. Her family are the investors. Her uncle is a very influential, extremely wealthy man who's ready to invest in our production. And he's ready to do it on one condition only. That Nathan be with his niece. That he guarantee her future. So that little surprise of yours at the hotel. You almost derailed the deal that's supposed to save us all. You almost destroyed everything because of your jealousy and pride. Jessica left the hospital room as if in a fog. Elizabeth's words rang in her ears, mingling with the rush of blood. Bankruptcy. Debts. An investor. A mistress who turned out to be a savior. It was too monstrous to be true and at the same time too logical to be pure invention. She walked down the corridor, noticing neither the nurse nor the frightened girl at reception. She got into the car and drove. But not home. To the factory. It was deep night. The factory's vast building, her father's life's work, stood dark and quiet. Jessica opened the main entrance with her key and walked through the echoing shops that smelled of wood and varnish. She turned on the lights only in her office and in accounting. If Elizabeth had told the truth, the traces would be in the documents. If she had lied, the traces would be there too. She began to work. As co-owner and operations director, she had full access to all accounts and financial reports. But until now she had trusted Nathan, who was commercial director, and hadn't delved into every figure. She handled production, logistics, people. He handled the money. It was their tacit division of labor, and it had worked for years. Now that trust was over. For the first few hours she found nothing suspicious. Ordinary operating expenses, supplier payments, salaries. Everything looked as it should. Fatigue began to take over. Jessica made herself strong coffee in the small staff kitchen and returned to the papers. She decided to take a different approach. Instead of looking at the consolidated reports Nathan prepared for her, she pulled the original bank statements. Every single one from the past year. And that's when it all started. At first it was small, almost invisible rivulets. A payment to some consulting firm she had never heard of. For market research, the memo said. The amount wasn't tiny, but it wasn't trivial either. Then another payment to the same firm 2 weeks later. Then a new hardware supplier with a very odd name, registered only 6 months ago. Payments to it were going out regularly, but Jessica, who knew every supplier by sight, had no idea who it was. She worked all night. And then all the next day. She didn't answer calls, didn't leave her office. She plunged into the world of numbers, accounts, invoices, and payment orders. And the deeper she dug, the more terrifying the picture became. It wasn't just leakage. It was a system. A perfectly designed, devious system for siphoning money out of the factory. Payments to shell companies for non-existent services. Invoices for raw materials inflated by 2, sometimes 3 times from friendly suppliers, with the difference obviously ending up in someone's pocket. Small but regular charges for representation expenses that over 6 months had added up to a massive sum. Nathan wasn't just stealing. He was methodically, month after month, bleeding his own company dry. He himself was creating the very crisis Elizabeth had spoken of with such tragedy. He was sinking the ship so he could then appear on it as the savior with money from the investor. By the end of the second day, a whole stack of folders lay on Jessica's desk. Each folder was a piece of evidence. Copies of statements, registration data of the shell companies the money was going to. Taken together, they formed a single clear, ugly picture: grand larceny. Fraud. She no longer had doubts. No fear. Only cold, firm resolve. She knew what to do. She wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. That would be too simple and too dirty for the family name, for her father's legacy. She would go to the one person for whom honor and justice had always been above all else. To Richard. She gathered all the folders into a large box. She got into the car and drove to her father-in-law's house. She didn't know if he was home, whether Elizabeth had returned from the hospital. She didn't care. He was home. Alone. He opened the door himself. Seeing her on the threshold, pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a huge box in her arms, he frowned. "Jessica? What happened?" "I need to talk to you, Richard," she said, and without waiting for an invitation, walked into his study. It was the Holy of Holies. The place where he had made important decisions when he still ran the factory himself. A heavy oak desk, a leather chair, photographs on the walls. Jessica set the box on the desk and began laying out the folders. One after another. "Here. This is the last 2 days of my life," she said. "I checked everything. Every invoice, every payment over the last 6 months." She opened the first folder. These are fictitious consulting contracts. The firm is registered to a front person. Here, padded estimates for lumber supplies. And this one is my favorite. She opened the third folder. Dozens of small discretionary charges that add up to nearly $2 million. Your son, Richard, is not saving the company. He is robbing it. He is deliberately driving it to bankruptcy so he can then sell it to his so-called investor for next to nothing. She spoke, and her voice grew steadier and steadier. She laid it all out. She expected to see shock on his face. Horror. Anger. Rage. She thought he would jump up, slam his fist on the table, demand that Nathan be called immediately. After all, Richard was an old-fashioned man for whom name and honor were not empty words. But he didn't jump up. He sat in his chair with his head bowed, silently looking at the documents spread out before him. He didn't even touch them. On his face there was no rage, only endless, mortal exhaustion. He seemed to age 20 years right before her eyes. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the study. "I know," he said at last. So quietly that Jessica barely heard. She froze. "What? What do you know?" "I know about this," he said, sweeping his gaze over the folders on the table. "Not everything, not in such detail. But I knew he was siphoning money." Jessica's breath caught. That couldn't be. The family's moral compass. Her last hope. But how? Why did you keep silent? Richard raised his eyes to her. There was such pain and shame in them that for a second Jessica felt sorry for him. "Because he's blackmailing me," he exhaled. He stood, went to the window, turning his back to her. "Many years ago, before you were with Nathan and while your father was still alive, I made a mistake. A very big mistake in business. There was one failed project. I invested a huge amount, trusted the wrong people. The factory nearly went under. To save us, I committed fraud. I forged a few documents to hide the losses from partners and obtain a new loan. It saved the company, but it was illegal. No one ever knew. Except Nathan." He spoke in a muffled, constricted voice. "He found out by accident, came across some old papers a couple of years ago. And since then he's had me on a hook. When I first noticed his schemes and tried to stop him, he simply said, 'Dad, if you tell anyone, I'll tell everyone about your little secret. And the Harrison name will be linked not to furniture, but to fraud. Not mine, yours.'" Richard turned around. His face was gray. "He's my son, Jessica. And I am a coward. I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy him with my own hands and disgrace the name I built my whole life. So I kept silent. I hoped he'd come to his senses, that it was temporary." He looked at the folders, then at her. There was a plea in his eyes. "Jessica, I beg you. Don't do this. Don't go to the police. Don't make it public. It will destroy everything. Not only him, but me. And Elizabeth. The Harrison name will turn to filth. Please, let's find another way. Let's talk to him." Jessica looked at him, and a cold, ringing realization filled her. She had been so sure she would find an ally in him. Instead, she found an accomplice. Frightened, broken, but still an accomplice who had chosen silence. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And no other path remained to her but war. Jessica silently gathered the folders from Richard's desk. She did not respond to his pleas, did not argue. There was no one to argue with. Before her sat not the head of the family, but a broken, frightened man who had long since made his choice. He had chosen shameful silence over truth. She put the box in the car and drove away without looking back. She did not go home. The thought of being in the same house with Nathan, or even next door to his parents, was unbearable. She pulled into a nondescript roadside motel outside the city, rented the cheapest room, and locked herself in. The room smelled of dust and other people's lives. She sat on the bed and stared at the wall for a long time. The box of evidence stood beside her, heavy and useless. To take it to the police would mean starting a war in which the family would immediately unite against her. Richard would deny everything to protect his son and his own secret. Elizabeth would paint her as a crazy, vindictive shrew. It would be her word against their common front. They would crush her. No, that wouldn't do. She couldn't be the source. She couldn't be the accuser. But she could light the fuse and step aside. Make someone else do the dirty work. Force them to expose themselves. She took out her laptop. She didn't need a policeman, she needed someone hungry for a scoop. Someone for whom the Harrison name was a big fish in their small town pond. She typed the name of their local newspaper into the search bar and began scrolling through articles. One name caught her eye, appearing under the sharpest, most scandalous headlines: Thomas Grayson. He wrote about the schemes of minor officials, about crooked developers. His style was cutting, brazen. He clearly wasn't afraid to make enemies. Just the man. Jessica drove to the nearest mall, bought a cheap prepaid phone with no registration. Then she found an internet cafe, paid for an hour, and took the farthest computer. She created a new email account with a strange, meaningless name. From that account, she wrote a short message to the paper's general mailbox, putting in the subject line "For Thomas Grayson." Personal. The text was brief and precise. No names. No details that could lead back to her. Good afternoon. I recommend taking a closer look at the financial activities of the Harrison Furniture Factory. Very strange things are happening in the company. Large sums are going to shell companies under the guise of payment for non-existent services. Management talks about a crisis, but it seems this crisis is being created artificially. Soon there will be an announcement of a new investor who is supposed to save everyone. But this deal looks like a major swindle. Check it. A well-wisher. She reread the letter several times. Enough to hook them. Not enough to identify her. She clicked send and felt a chill run down her back. That was it. The Rubicon was crossed. She closed the email, left the cafe, tossed the SIM card into a trash can on the way, and left the phone on a bench in the park. The next few days were torture. She went back to her house, because running would look like an admission of guilt. Nathan hardly appeared, spending nights somewhere in Chicago, citing negotiations with investors. Elizabeth returned from the hospital playing the role of a fragile martyr. The whole family surrounded her with care, casting sidelong, condemning looks at Jessica. Jessica kept silent. She went to work, signed papers, pretended nothing was happening, while every morning the first thing she did was open the local newspaper's website. On the fourth day she saw it. A headline in large letters on the front page: "Financial storm clouds over the Harrison Empire. Tax authority prepares audit." Her heart pounded. Grayson had delivered. The article was cautious. The journalist cited rumors in business circles and information from an anonymous source. He wrote about a possible investigation into financial violations and that the famous factory, the pride of the city, might find itself at the center of a major scandal. It wasn't a direct blow, but a shot into the air. A warning. But it echoed across the entire city. The phone rang almost immediately. It was Richard. "Have you seen it?" "What have you done, Jessica?" "I begged you." "I did nothing," she replied coolly, and hung up. That evening an enraged Nathan burst into the house. He stormed in, waving his phone with the article open. "Is this your doing?" He was practically breathing fury. Elizabeth scurried after him, pressing a hand to her heart. "Nananushka, don't get so worked up, it's bad for you." "It's her, of course it's her. She wants to ruin us all." Jessica looked at them calmly. "Prove it," she said simply. Nathan froze. He understood he couldn't prove anything. The leak was anonymous. He stood for a moment, devouring her with a hateful stare, and then his expression changed. Rage gave way to a condescending smirk. "Who do you think you are?" "Just a coincidence." "Some tax audit, big deal." "Everything's clean with us. We'll sort it out. We'll pay whoever needs paying, and they'll back off. And you'll just sit here quietly going mad with anger." He turned on his heel and left, taking Elizabeth with him, who kept muttering about ingratitude. Jessica remained alone in the living room. She realized they were underestimating her. They thought her a hysteric, incapable of calculated action. And that worked in her favor. They relaxed, deciding this coincidence was just an annoying hiccup. A day later, Nathan, apparently to celebrate his supposed victory and calm his partners, took Monica to the most expensive restaurant in Chicago. He was cheerful, carefree, telling her how easily they would get around this little nuisance. "Some local hack decided to make a name off ours. The tax people will come, look at the papers, we'll grease their palms, and it'll be over. Nothing to worry about, darling." He smilingly handed her his phone to show her the article, to laugh at its style. Monica took the phone. She lazily skimmed the text, but then her gaze caught on the author's name under the headline. She frowned slightly, tilted her head. Thomas Grayson, she said thoughtfully, as if recalling something. Funny. I had a classmate in school with the same name. He was always trying to stick his nose into things, too. Wrote all sorts of exposés for the school newspaper. She said it casually, like a meaningless fact from the past, and handed the phone back to him. Nathan took the phone, but his smile slowly slid from his face. He stared at the journalist's name. Grayson. A classmate. A chain clicked into place in his head. Tax audits don't start with leaks to newspapers. Anonymous sources don't pick random journalists to dump information. And they certainly don't choose an old acquaintance of his mistress. The probability of such a coincidence, 0. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a precise, calculated strike. And only one person could have delivered it. The one who knew about Monica. The one who had a motive. The one he had written off. The blood drained from his face. He looked at Monica, who was carelessly choosing dessert, but he didn't see her. He saw Jessica. And in that moment he understood with soul-freezing clarity that his wife was not a hysterical fool to be easily deceived and discarded. She was a cold-blooded, calculating enemy who had just made her first move in the war, and he had no idea what her next move would be. Nathan shoved the dessert plate away. The evening was over. He threw a few bills on the table, grabbed Monica by the hand, and dragged her to the exit, ignoring her bewildered questions. He no longer saw her as the key to salvation. He saw her as the weak link that had almost cost him everything. His underestimation of Jessica had been a colossal mistake, and now he had to act quickly and ruthlessly. The counterstrike had to be not merely strong. It had to be lethal. The next day Elizabeth called Jessica. Her voice was unusually formal, icy. Jessica, we expect you at our house today at 7 in the evening. There will be a family council. Very important. Your brother, Matthew, has also been invited. Tardiness is unacceptable. And she hung up without waiting for an answer. Jessica immediately sensed a trap. A family council. With her brother. Why did they need Matthew? Jessica's younger brother, Matthew Finn, was her only blood relative after their parents' deaths. He was a good guy, but soft. Indecisive. His small organic delivery business was constantly struggling, and Jessica and Nathan had helped him with money more than once. He had always been on her side, loved her, admired her. His presence at this council was alarming. She called him. Matthew, hi. Did they invite you to the Harrisons today too? Yeah, Jessica, hi. His voice sounded tense, unnatural. Elizabeth called. Said something important about the factory. And they want my opinion as a relative, too. I don't know what that means. Matthew, something's going on. Be careful. They're planning something against me, Jessica said. Oh, come on, sis, don't wind yourself up. They probably just want to discuss that newspaper article. It'll be fine, he said far too brightly, and the cheerfulness rang false. Exactly at 7, Jessica walked into the Harrisons' living room. Everything was staged like a trial. In the center sat Elizabeth and Richard. Richard stared at the floor. His face was stone. Elizabeth, on the contrary, sat upright like a queen on a throne, her gaze full of venomous triumph. Nathan stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed and looked at Jessica with a cold smirk. Off to the side, in an armchair, sat her brother Matthew. He didn't look at her when she came in. He stared out the window, looking as if he might be sick. Jessica sat down opposite them. The atmosphere was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Well then, everyone's here, Nathan began, stepping forward. He took a thick folder from the table. We've gathered you because something terrible has happened in our family. The Harrison name is defamed. Our factory is under threat. And we know who is to blame. He looked straight at Jessica. After that vile article came out, we were forced to begin our own internal investigation. We couldn't believe the tax authority took an interest in us for no reason. We hired the best auditors to check our accounts. And what we found shocked us. He opened the folder and slammed it down on the table in front of Richard. Jessica, his voice rang with feigned sorrow, how could you? We trusted you. You weren't just my wife, you were a partner. And you've been stealing from us for years. Jessica stared at him, unable to believe her ears. It was so brazen, so absurd that she didn't at once find words. What nonsense are you spouting, Nathan? It's not nonsense. Elizabeth screeched. It's the truth. You lived large, spent our money on your whims. Fancy rags, trips. We know everything. Nathan raised a hand to calm his mother. Here are the documents, he indicated the folder. It's all here. Fake invoices you personally signed. Payment orders with your electronic signature transferring money to shady firms. You created an entire scheme to siphon funds from the factory. And when you realized we were close to exposing you, you panicked. And you yourself leaked information to that dirty journalist to frame me. To pin the crisis on me and walk away clean. Jessica stood up. She was shaking with rage. It's a lie. A brazen, monstrous lie. You set all this up. These documents are fakes. You're the one who robbed the company. I saw the real statements. And where are these real statements of yours? Nathan sneered. You destroyed them when you realized things were bad. We have evidence. And you have only words. Jessica looked at Richard. Her last, ghostly hope. Richard, you know the truth. Tell them. Tell them he's blackmailing you. Richard lifted his eyes slowly. They were empty. Jessica, these documents. I've seen them. The signatures look like yours. I don't know what to think. He looked away. He betrayed her again. Broken by fear, he chose the path of least resistance. He simply washed his hands of it. I never signed anything. Jessica cried, feeling despair rise in her throat. It's a forgery. Any examination will prove it. An examination will take months, Nathan said coolly. And we don't have months. The factory's reputation is collapsing now. Investors are spooked. We have to act. But we've decided to give you one last chance. Family style. He slipped back into the role of magnanimous husband. No one wants a scandal. We won't go to the police. If you sign a confession right now, step away quietly, transfer your share to me so I can save what's left of our business, we'll bury this. No one will know. You'll leave in disgrace, but free. It was an ultimatum. A perfectly calculated trap. They had left her no way out. Any move she made led to defeat. And then Jessica remembered Matthew. Her brother. He'd sat there the whole time, shoulders hunched, silent. He'd heard everything. He knew her. He couldn't believe this madness. Matthew. She turned to him. Her voice trembled. Matthew, tell them. You're my brother. You know I would never do this. Tell them it's all lies. All eyes turned to Matthew. He shrank under their weight. He slowly raised his head. His face was white as a sheet, sweat beaded on his forehead. He avoided meeting her eyes. Richard, apparently deciding to show one last grain of objectivity, asked a question. Matthew, tell us honestly. Has Jessica ever told you, complained about a lack of money? Maybe mentioned financial difficulties? That she needed funds? Silence fell. Jessica looked at her brother, and a tiny, desperate hope flickered in her heart. Now he would say no. He would stand up and say they were all insane. He would save her. Matthew took a deep, ragged breath. He looked somewhere at the wall above Jessica's head. Yes, he said hoarsely, almost in a whisper. She did. Jessica's world stopped. She couldn't believe her ears. What? She breathed. Matthew swallowed and went on, louder now, as if reciting a memorized lesson. His voice was monotone, lifeless. She called me a few weeks ago. Said she was in over her head. That she had problems. Said that she had borrowed some money from the company. Thought she'd return it quickly, but couldn't. She asked me for a loan to cover the shortage. But I didn't have that kind of money. He spoke, and Jessica looked at him, and everything inside her turned to ice. Every word was like a knife. Her own brother. Her Matthew. He hadn't just kept silent. He lied. He testified against her. With his own hands he was pushing her into the pit Nathan had dug. She heard nothing else. Not Elizabeth's victorious sigh, not Richard's heavy exhale, not Nathan's words as he now declared that everything was clear. She looked only at her brother, who at last dared to meet her gaze. There were tears in his eyes. Tears of shame, despair, and betrayal. And in that moment Jessica realized she had lost not just a battle. She had lost the last person whose love and loyalty she had been sure of. She was left utterly alone. Jessica said nothing. She simply stood up and headed for the exit. She didn't look at anyone. The pain was so strong it turned into numbness. She walked past her brother without granting him a glance. She could feel his eyes on her back, but she didn't turn around. Arguing, shouting, trying to prove anything was pointless. They had won. They had destroyed her. The next day Nathan's lawyer was waiting for her. He came straight to the factory. He had a document with him. An agreement for the temporary transfer of managerial authority. Fine words that concealed total capitulation. She was being removed from all affairs for the duration of the internal investigation. She no longer had signing authority, had no access to the accounts, could not enter her own office. They were stripping her of everything. She looked at the lawyer, then at the document. "And if I don't sign?" she asked in a lifeless voice. The lawyer smiled politely. "Then Mr. Harrison will be forced to transfer the materials from our audit to law enforcement, with a statement alleging embezzlement. I wouldn't advise letting it come to that, Mrs. Harrison. It would be a very loud and unpleasant process." The threat was direct and unambiguous. They had backed their lies with forged documents, and now they held all the cards. Jessica picked up the pen. Her fingers wouldn't obey. She signed the paper that stripped her of the work of her entire life. When she came home that evening, she couldn't open the door. The key didn't fit. She tried again. And again. Then she understood. He had changed the locks. She stood on the threshold of her own home, into which she could no longer enter. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Nathan. "Your things are at my parents' house. You can pick them up whenever you like. I think we'd better live separately. For everyone's peace of mind." She lowered the hand holding the phone. That was it. The final chord. She hadn't just been thrown out of her job. She had been thrown out of her life. Humiliated, slandered, without a home and without her work. And worst of all, betrayed by her own brother. She got into the car but had no idea where to go. Her thoughts were tangled. She couldn't go to the Harrisons for her things. She couldn't look them in the face. She just drove aimlessly through the night city. And over in her head she heard Matthew's dull, monotonous voice. Yes, it said. She had to understand. Not forgive, no. There was no forgiveness for this. She had to hear from him why. Why did he do it? She began calling him. 1 ring, 2, 3, he didn't pick up. She called again and again until he finally declined the call. Then she wrote a message, "I need to talk to you. Tell me where you are." The reply came half an hour later. 1 word. The name of a cheap, grimy bar on the outskirts of the city. Springfield. A place people went to get drunk and forget. Jessica found the bar. A dim sign. The smell of sour beer and cigarette smoke. She went inside. At the farthest table, hunched over a glass of whiskey, sat Matthew. He was already drunk. Seeing her, he flinched, but didn't leave. Jessica sat down opposite. She looked at him in silence, and he couldn't lift his eyes. "Why?" she asked. Just one word, carrying all her pain. He knocked back the whiskey, grimaced. "Forgive me, Jessica, forgive me," he mumbled, burying his face in his hands. "I'm not asking for forgiveness." Her voice was hard as steel. "I'm asking why you did it." He raised red, swollen eyes, ruined by tears and alcohol. "I had no choice," he whispered. "He destroyed me." And he told her. It began about a month ago. His small business, barely staying afloat as it was, suddenly started to collapse. His main and most reliable supplier, with whom he had worked for years, abruptly broke the contract without explanation. Then 2 more refused. His delivery vans started breaking down one after another, needing expensive repairs. Orders fell through, clients left. In 2 weeks he found himself on the verge of total bankruptcy, with huge debts and no prospects at all. He was desperate. And at that moment Nathan appeared. Like a benevolent magician. He said he'd heard about his problems and wanted to help. He offered him a large sum of money. Enough to cover all the debts and start over. Just like that. As a gesture of family support. At first Matthew couldn't believe his luck. And then, the day before the family council, Nathan came to see him. Matthew spoke in fits and starts, tripping over his words. And he showed me documents. A payment order. Turned out he paid my supplier to drop me. He bribed the mechanic at the garage to sabotage my vehicles. He set it all up, Jessica. He deliberately, methodically pushed me into the abyss so he could then show up and save me. Jessica listened, her hands clenching into fists. It was Nathan's style. Cruel, calculating, leaving the victim not a single chance. He said the money he gave me wasn't a gift, but a debt. And I had to work it off. He said he had one small request for me. He told me to come to that meeting and say exactly what I said. Word for word. He made me memorize the text like a poem. He said if I refused or said even one word wrong, he would simply take the money back. He would show those payment orders to all my former partners and prove I staged my own bankruptcy to cheat my creditors. He promised to have me jailed for fraud. Matthew covered his face with his hands again and began to shake in silent sobs. I was scared, Jessica. So scared. I have debts, a family. I broke. I betrayed you. I know I'm worthless. I will never forgive myself. Jessica looked at her broken, crushed brother. Pathetic and miserable. The rage ebbed away. Only a cold, scorched desert remained inside. She stood to leave. There was nothing more for her here. Wait, he shouted after her. Stop. She stopped without turning. I know there's no fixing this, he said, staggering as he approached. I can't take my words back. But I can give you something. Something I overheard by accident. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a pen. Grabbed a paper napkin from the table. When he was working me over, he was confident of victory. He was drinking whiskey, boasting. Said that soon all the problems would be solved. That all the money from the deal would go to a safe place where no one could reach it. He was on the phone then with someone, some banker, I think. He named the bank. I remembered it because the name was strange. With quick, sloppy drunken handwriting, Matthew scribbled something on the napkin. Then he pressed the crumpled paper into her palm. Here, he whispered. I don't know what it'll give you. Maybe nothing, but it's all I have. It's the only way I can help you. Forgive me, sister. Jessica opened her hand. On the dirty, damp napkin were 2 words. The name of a bank she had never heard of, and a country. Cayman Trust Bank. Cayman Islands. It wasn't just information. It was a key. A thin thread that could lead her straight to the heart of the whole swindle. The only chance she had left. Jessica left the bar, clutching the precious napkin in her fist. She didn't look back at her sobbing brother. Pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she had what she hadn't had an hour ago, a goal. Small, ghostly, but still a hope. Cayman Trust Bank. Cayman Islands. She returned to her nondescript hotel room. Her accounts had been frozen on Nathan's orders pending clarification. Credit cards blocked. She had almost no cash left. She needed money, and not a small amount. Checking an offshore account at a bank in the Cayman Islands wasn't something one could do over the internet. She needed a specialist. An expensive specialist. Jessica opened the travel bag she had hastily packed when she realized she couldn't get into her home. There were a few things: cosmetics, documents. And at the very bottom, in a velvet pouch, the thing she always carried with her. Her mother's jewelry. A small but very valuable diamond necklace and earrings. It was her only keepsake of her mother, the only truly precious thing that belonged solely to her. Her father had given them to her mother on their 20th wedding anniversary. After her mother's death, he gave them to Jessica with the words, "Let this be your untouchable reserve for the darkest day." The darkest day had come. She looked at the necklace, and tears flowed on their own. For the first time through all of this, she allowed herself to cry. She didn't cry from humiliation or resentment. She mourned her former life, her family, her faith in people. She mourned the necessity of selling what was dearer than money. In the morning, with swollen, red eyes but firm resolve, she went to one of the most reputable pawnshops in downtown Chicago. The appraiser examined the stones through a loop for a long time, clicked his tongue. He named a sum. It was enormous. Enough to live comfortably for a few years. Or to hire the best private investigator. Jessica didn't hesitate for a second. She signed the papers, and cold, heavy bundles of cash went into her bag. She walked out of the pawnshop feeling emptied out and at the same time free. She had burned the last bridge. There was no way back now. She found the private detective's name through her father's old contacts. Daniel Stone. A former FBI agent turned private practitioner. A man with a bulldog reputation who could get information from anywhere. Expensive, but incredibly effective. And, most importantly, absolutely discreet. She met him in an unremarkable cafe. Stone turned out to be a man in his 50s, with tired but very attentive eyes. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He listened silently as Jessica told him exactly as much as was needed. There was a suspicion that her husband, Nathan Harrison, was siphoning money from the family business into an account at a bank in the Cayman Islands. Here was the bank's name. The task: find that account, learn whose name it was opened under, and if possible obtain a transaction statement. As quickly and confidentially as possible. Stone looked at her, then at the scrap of napkin with the bank name that she laid on the table. "This will be expensive," he said in an even voice. "How much?" He named a sum that would have taken an ordinary person's breath away. It was almost half of what she had gotten for her mother's jewelry. "All right," Jessica said without blinking. She took a bundle of cash from her bag and slid it to him. "This is an advance. The rest upon results." He counted the money, nodded, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "I'll need a week. Maybe a bit more. Wait for my call." He stood and left. That week was the longest of Jessica's life. She lived as if in a vacuum. She rented a small apartment on the outskirts so she wouldn't spend money on a hotel. She spoke to no one. Every day she forced herself to go outside, to walk in the park, so she wouldn't go mad within four walls. She saw new articles in the papers about troubles at the Harrison factory. Nathan gave comments, spoke of temporary difficulties and of an imminent rescue thanks to new partners. He looked confident and strong. The master of the situation. Jessica waited. Hope gave way to despair and returned again. What if Matthew had misheard something? What if Stone found nothing? Then it was over. She would have neither money, nor evidence, nor a future left. Exactly 8 days later her phone rang. An unknown number. "Mrs. Harrison? Stone here. I have information. Can we meet in an hour, same place? Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Yes. I'll be there. She sat in the same cafe, at the same table. Her hands were icy. Stone arrived on time. He sat down opposite her and placed a thin folder on the table. You were right, he began without preamble. An account in your husband's name at Cayman Trust Bank does exist. Opened a year and a half ago. Money from your factory has been flowing there regularly for the last 6 or 7 months. In small tranches, through a chain of shell companies. Very skillful work, almost untraceable. The total amount siphoned off is about $30 million. Jessica listened, and everything inside her turned to ice. $30 million. That was the price of her humiliation, of her ruined life. Here's a printout of the main transactions. He slid the folder toward her. She opened it. Numbers, dates, names of dummy companies. Everything she had been looking for. This was it, the irrefutable proof. With this she could go to the police and destroy Nathan. She was about to close the folder, but Stone stopped her. That's not all, he said quietly. Flip to the end. There's something more interesting there. Jessica turned the page. The last sheet was a copy of a payment order. She looked at the date. It was made more than a year ago. One of the very first transactions from that account, right after it was opened. The recipient, a large international insurance company. The amount, substantial, an annual premium. Then she read the payment description, payment under life insurance policy number 77-349B. Jessica looked at Stone in puzzlement. What is this? He insured his life? Stone shook his head. His tired eyes regarded her with something like sympathy. No. Not his. This payment caught my interest too. I used my old contacts and checked the policy number. It's a very expensive policy. For several $1 million. The beneficiary, in the event of a claim, is your husband, Nathan Harrison. He paused. And the insured under this policy is you, Jessica. Jessica stared at the paper. She reread the line several times, but the meaning wouldn't sink in, slipped away. And then it hit. In a cold, clammy, monstrous wave. Insurance. On her life. For millions of dollars. Taken out a year ago. Long before Monica. This wasn't merely infidelity or a desire to get rich. The picture snapped fully into place, and its ugliness was unbearable. Divorce, public humiliation, stripping her of her share in the company, all that was merely an intermediate stage. A backup plan. The real plan had always been different. He had never intended simply to get rid of her. He intended to kill her. Finally and irrevocably. Jessica looked at the insurance printout, and the letters blurred before her eyes. She couldn't get enough air. She grabbed the edge of the table not to fall. The cafe, Stone, the folder of documents, all of it receded. In her mind there was only one thought, pulsing at her temples, freezing her blood. He wanted to kill her. This was no longer a story about betrayal, deceit, or greed. This was a story about a cold-blooded, planned murder. All those months she had lived with him, slept in the same bed, she had been not a wife but a walking policy worth several $1 million. Every smile, every word, every touch of his now looked like a monstrous lie, a prelude to her end. The sudden brake failures in her car 6 months ago, which she had chalked up to accident. The strange food poisoning after a dinner he cooked. All of it now fell into place, forming a ghastly mosaic. Mrs. Harrison, are you all right? Stone's voice snapped her back to reality. She raised her eyes to him. There were no more tears or confusion in them. Only cold, ringing emptiness. Yes, she said hoarsely. I'm fine. Here's the rest of your fee. She took money from her bag, counted out the required amount, and placed it on the table. She didn't even count what she had left. It no longer mattered. What are you going to do? Stone asked. There was professional curiosity in his voice, and perhaps a drop of human concern. What I should have done from the beginning. I'm going to the police. She took the folder and left the cafe. Now she had no choice. Family honor, reputation, business, all of it no longer mattered. This was about her life. She drove to the Chicago Police Department headquarters. She asked to see an investigator from the Financial Crimes Unit. She was received by Detective McCormick, a weary middle-aged man with a deadened gaze that seemed to have seen everything in his time. Jessica sat across from him and laid the entire story on the table. Without emotion, dryly, as at an interrogation. She told him about the fake business trip, the staged heart attack, the shell companies, and the embezzlement. She spoke, and the detective listened, nodding lazily and jotting something in his notebook. He didn't look impressed. Just another family squabble over money. But when she got to the Cayman Islands account and set the copy of the insurance policy before him, McCormick showed interest for the first time. He took the sheet and studied it carefully. "Do you understand what you're accusing him of?" he asked, raising his eyes to her. "Yes. I'm accusing him of preparing to murder me," McCormick sighed. He leaned back in his squeaky chair. "Mrs. Harrison, you have my sympathy. The story is certainly wild. Embezzlement from the factory, we can check that. We'll request documents, conduct an audit. That's our job, though it will take time. But the insurance policy," he tapped the paper with a finger, "by itself it proves nothing. So the husband insured his wife. That's not illegal. Where are the threats? Where are the attempts? Your suspicions about the breaks and poisoning are just that, suspicions. They won't hold up in a case. Do you have witnesses, recordings, anything directly pointing to his intent?" Jessica was silent. She had no witnesses. Only a chain of circumstantial evidence that to her was obvious. To the law, mere conjecture. You see, without a direct act, there's no crime. We can't open an investigation into preparation for murder based solely on this policy. Your husband will say it was his way of caring for your future. And any lawyer will bat that away, McCormick concluded. He saw the disappointment on her face. "Look, I'll take your statement. We'll register it. I'll attach all these documents to the possible fraud case at your factory. We'll keep an eye on the situation. But I have to be honest with you, this won't be a priority case for us. We've got murders, robberies. And you, for now, have a complicated divorce with financial claims." Jessica walked out of the police station with a feeling of complete powerlessness. The law she had pinned her hopes on turned out to be a slow, unwieldy machine that could not protect her. She needed something else. Something that would turn circumstantial evidence into a direct accusation. Something that would force the police to act immediately. She replayed the whole scheme in her head, over and over. Nathan. Elizabeth. The money. And Monica. The mistress, the niece of an influential investor. The key to everything. Who was he, this mysterious uncle ready to pour millions into a half-collapsed factory in exchange for his niece's happiness? It sounded too fairy tale to be true. Jessica didn't go home. She went to the city public library. She needed a computer with internet access, but not her own. She no longer wanted to leave digital traces. In the quiet reading room, among students and retirees, she sat down at an old computer and began to search. She didn't know the uncle's last name. But she knew Monica's name, Monica Ross. And she remembered how Nathan, boasting, had once let slip that the uncle's name was Christopher. Jessica began typing different combinations into the search engine. Monica Ross, Christopher, investor. Ross, Christopher. The results were empty. No influential businessmen by that name on any rich lists. She hit a dead end. Maybe Elizabeth had made it all up? Or Nathan had lied to her about the uncle. And then it struck her. She remembered the evening when Nathan first introduced Monica to his parents. He hadn't said the uncle's last name. He had said, "And her uncle, Christopher Coleman, has shown great interest in our business." Coleman. Not Ross. Jessica's hands began to tremble. She erased the old query and slowly typed into the search bar, letter by letter, Christopher Coleman, businessman. She hit enter. The first few links led to namesakes, a scientist, an athlete. And then she saw the headline of an article from a major national news outlet. The headline read, "Wanted, corporate raider Christopher Coleman, suspected in a series of frauds." Her heart plunged. She clicked the link. The article was a year old. It described in detail the scheme used by one Christopher Coleman. He gained the trust of owners of troubled companies, promised investments, carried out sham deals, drove the firm into bankruptcy, and then bought up its assets for pennies through front entities. The article said he was suspected in at least 3 such swindles across the country and had been placed on a federal wanted list. And beneath the text was a photograph. Jessica froze. She stared at the grainy, black and white photo from a police database. And a painfully familiar face stared back at her. Smiling eyes, a neat beard, an expensive suit. No doubt. It was the very man Monica had introduced to her and to Nathan's parents at that fateful dinner. The very wealthy and influential uncle. The future savior of their family business. Everything fell into place. This was not just a plan to siphon money. This was not merely preparation for murder. This was a grand, multi-step con. Nathan wasn't going to save the factory at all. He intended to destroy it with the help of a nationally known fraudster, pin everything on him, and then disappear with the stolen money and the insurance payout for her, Jessica's, death. The plan was perfect. And now she knew it in full. Jessica snapped the browser tab shut. She sat before the dark screen in the library's hush, but a roar filled her ears. A picture that had simply been frightening now became apocalyptic. Nathan didn't just want to kill her and take the money. He intended to stage the public annihilation of her family's life's work, bring in a con man who, under the guise of investment, would drain the last drops from the factory, topple it with a sham bankruptcy, and then vanish. And Nathan, he would come out of it clean. A grieving widower and the victim of a devious swindler who had tricked him and destroyed the Harrisons' legacy. He would get everything: sympathy, freedom, the stolen millions, and the insurance payout. The perfect plan. Flawless. She stood and left the library. The cold air struck her face, but she didn't feel it. Everything inside was on fire. She could have gone straight back to Detective McCormick with this new information. A printout of the wanted notice for Coleman was no longer circumstantial evidence. It was direct proof of preparation for major fraud, but she stopped halfway. What would the police do? They would begin a check. Slowly, by the book. They would send requests, summon people for questioning. It would take weeks, if not months. And Nathan would not wait. He would sense danger. He would realize she was digging under him and accelerate his plan. Or he would simply disappear with Coleman and the money, leaving Jessica to deal with the factory's ruins and debts. Or perhaps he would decide that the time had come for that very insured event. No. Going to the police now would be like spooking a beast crouched in the bushes. He would either run or attack. She had to act herself. Quickly. And on his turf. She needed not just to stop him, but to do it in a way that he couldn't escape responsibility. To do it publicly. But how? She had been removed from affairs. She had no levers of control in her hands. She was an outcast. She needed information. Eyes and ears inside the factory. And she remembered Mary, the secretary who had worked there since her father's time. A quiet, unobtrusive woman nearing retirement, loyal to the old owner and always fond of Jessica. Nathan had kept her in place because he considered her harmless old furniture. He had underestimated the enemy again. Jessica called Mary on her personal mobile late in the evening. "Mary, hello. It's Jessica." There was a pause on the other end. "Jessica. I can't talk to you. We've been forbidden." "I know, Mary. I don't need anything forbidden. I just need information. Nathan is preparing something big with the new investor. Have you heard anything? Mary was silent again, apparently wrestling with herself. Loyalty to the old order fought fear of the new. Yes, she whispered at last. They're preparing something. Something grand. The whole factory is in an uproar. He's telling everyone he signed the deal of the century. What deal? Specifically? Jessica pressed. He says he's found a new partner. The Imperial Hotel chain. Allegedly, they want to sign an exclusive contract with us for full furnishing of all their new hotels across the country. It's huge money. A contract that will pull us out of all debts and make us rich for years. Jessica froze. The Imperial Hotel chain was one of the biggest players in the market. Such a contract would indeed be the deal of the century. The perfect cover for fraud. No one would doubt the legitimacy of investments under such a big name. And then what? When is this supposed to happen? Next week. Wednesday. Mary's whisper grew even softer. Nathan rented the biggest conference hall at the Panorama Hotel here in town. He's holding a press conference. He invited all the local TV stations, newspapers, the whole city elite. He said it will be a historic moment. The public signing of the contract with Imperial and the announcement of a partnership with a new investor, Mr. Coleman, who will finance the deal. He wants the whole city to see his triumph. Jessica closed her eyes. There it was, the stage, the set, the audience. Nathan himself had prepared everything for his own unmasking. He was so certain of his impunity, of his genius, that he had decided to make a public spectacle of his victory. He wanted to bask in the limelight before delivering the final blow. He wanted everyone to see how he, Nathan Harrison, saved the family legacy. And at that moment everything clicked in Jessica's head. Rage and despair gave way to cold, ringing calculation. She would no longer hide in libraries and dark corners. She would not send anonymous tips and wait for help from lumbering police. She would step into the light, onto the same stage he had so carefully prepared for himself. She thanked Mary, promising never to expose her, and hung up. She walked to the window and looked out at the night city. Somewhere in one of those buildings, her husband, her enemy, was now planning his triumph. He thought she was broken, crushed, harmless. He thought she would quietly watch as he took everything. He was wrong. The Shadow War was over. She would accept his rules of the game. He wanted publicity? He would get it. He wanted the whole city to watch him? The whole city would watch. But they would see not his triumph, but his fall. That press conference would become not a celebration of his victory, but the scene of his public execution, and she would be the executioner. The plan was bold, almost insane. To burst into the press conference and shout accusations would mean looking like a hysteric again. Security would simply escort her out under the audience's pitying looks. No. For her words to carry weight, she needed an ally. Someone whose word would not be doubted. Someone with the name Harrison. Only one person remained. Richard. Jessica knew this was her last chance. If he refused, she would have to act alone, and her chances of success would be negligible. She drove to her father-in-law's house. She didn't call ahead. She didn't want to give him time to prepare or to consult Elizabeth. She arrived during the day, when she knew Elizabeth usually went shopping or met her friends. Richard opened the door himself again. Seeing her, he darkened. "Jessica," I asked, he began wearily. "I need 5 minutes of your time. For the last time." Her voice was calm and firm. She wasn't asking. She was demanding. He hesitated for a second, then stepped aside, letting her into the house. She went to his study again. This time she hadn't brought a box of folders. She took just 2 sheets of paper from her bag. Silently, she laid them on his desk. Side by side. The first sheet, a copy of the life insurance policy on her. The second, a news printout of a federal wanted notice for the fraudster Christopher Coleman. Richard lowered his eyes to the papers. First he looked at Coleman's photograph. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He recognized him. He had seen this man. Nathan had brought him to dinner, introduced him as a future partner. Then his gaze shifted to the second sheet. He read the lines of the insurance policy for a long time, not fully grasping their meaning. "What is this?" he asked without raising his head. "This is your son's plan," Jessica said coldly. She no longer tried to stir his sympathy. She simply stated facts. The man in this photo is not an investor. He's a fraudster on the federal wanted list. His name is Christopher Coleman. Nathan brought him in to stage a performance. They are going to announce a fake contract with a hotel chain, secure sham investments from Coleman, drive the factory into bankruptcy, and disappear with all the money. She paused, giving him time to absorb what he'd heard. "And the second document is what awaits me after they're done with the factory. It's a life insurance policy on me. For several $1,000,000. The beneficiary is Nathan. He took it out more than a year ago. He doesn't just want to take the business. He wants to take everything." Richard sat motionless. He stared at the 2 sheets of paper, and his face slowly turned ashen gray. The hands resting on the desk trembled faintly. He shifted his gaze from the fraudster's photograph to the lines of the policy and back again. In his head, titanic work seemed to be taking place. The facts were assembling into a single monstrous picture. His silence, his fear, his attempts to preserve peace in the family, all of it had been complicity in preparing a grand swindle and a cold-blooded murder. At last he raised his eyes to her. They held no more weariness or shame. They held horror. Pure, unfeigned horror at realizing what kind of monster his son had become. "My God," he whispered. "This can't be. It not only can be. It's happening right now," Jessica cut in. "Next Wednesday, at the press conference, Nathan and Coleman are going to publicly sign these fake contracts. That will be the point of no return. After that, stopping them by legal means will be nearly impossible. They'll initiate bankruptcy proceedings, and it will all be over." She looked him straight in the eyes. "You have a choice, Richard. The first, you keep silent. You sit and watch as your son, together with a fugitive criminal, destroys the work of your life. As the Harrison name becomes a synonym not only for disgrace, but for fraud and, possibly, murder. And you will live with that for the rest of your days." She paused again, letting the words sink as deeply as possible. "The second choice, you help me. You help me stop him. Right there, at that press conference. Before the whole city. We can save the factory. We can save what remains of your family's honor." She wasn't offering him an easy path. She was asking him to choose between 2 catastrophes. He was silent for a very long time. He looked out the window at the trees his father had planted. He looked at the photographs on the walls. Here he was, young, with Jessica's father, opening a new workshop. Here he was with little Nathan on his shoulders. His world was collapsing before his eyes. Finally he turned to her. His face was haggard, but a firm, fearsome expression had appeared on it. The look of a man who had made a final decision. "All right," he said in a hoarse, cracked voice. "I'll help you." Jessica felt the enormous tension release its grip. She had done it. She had an ally. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "I need a copy of the investment agreement. The very one they intend to sign. Can you get it?" Richard nodded. "I'm still the founder. I have the right to demand any documents. I'll get it." He looked at her, and a new pain appeared in his eyes, mixed with entreaty. "Jessica, I'll do whatever you say. I'll help you stop him. But I have one condition. One request." He swallowed. "Elizabeth, she mustn't know everything. She won't survive it. She lives in a world where Nathan is a genius, a savior. If she finds out that he's capable of this," he nodded at the insurance policy, "it will kill her. Truly kill her. We have to shield her from that. We'll expose his fraud, we'll save the factory. But I beg you, Let's do it in a way that she never learns the most terrible truth about him. Let's preserve at least the fragments of her illusions. He was asking her to protect the woman who had betrayed and humiliated her. He was asking her to show mercy to her tormentor. Jessica looked at this broken old man who was ready to destroy his own son but was desperately trying to save his wife. And she realized she had no choice. She needed him, and this was his price. All right, Jessica nodded. We'll protect her. With a nod to Richard, Jessica felt a tacit, heavy pact fall into place between them. They had become conspirators. The next few days turned into tense, covert preparation for battle. Richard, citing the founder's rights and the need to personally verify the partner's reliability before such an important event, demanded that Nathan provide all draft agreements for his review. Nathan, convinced of his own genius and of his father's brokenness, reluctantly agreed. He was sure the old man would grasp nothing in the tangle of legal phrasing, and refusing him would only arouse unnecessary suspicion. A day later, Richard called Jessica. He didn't speak directly. He used their prearranged words. Jessica, I looked over those documents for our new project. It's all very convoluted. I need you to take a fresh look. I'll leave a copy in our old mailbox. That evening, Jessica drove to their old family home, where no one lived anymore. In the rusty mailbox that hadn't been used for years lay a thick envelope. She took it and returned to her rented apartment. She sat over those papers all night. It wasn't just a contract. It was a legally impeccable noose. The agreement was drafted so that Coleman's firm invested not money but certain intangible assets and exclusive rights to work with the Imperial Hotel chain, valued at an astronomical sum. In exchange, Coleman received a controlling stake in the chairman's seat on the board. The contract was stuffed with hidden clauses allowing the new owner to initiate bankruptcy at any time for the most trivial reasons. It was a death sentence for the factory, wrapped in pretty packaging. Now Jessica held the trump card. The next step was to prepare an information bomb. She bought another burner SIM card and called the journalist Thomas Grayson. Thomas, it's your anonymous well-wisher again, she said, altering her voice. Grayson perked up immediately on the other end. I'm listening. Something new on the Harrisons? Not just new. A story that will make your name nationwide, Jessica said. On Wednesday, at the Panorama Hotel, 10 a.m., there will be a press conference where Nathan Harrison will sign a contract with a new investor. I want you there. And I want you prepared. I'll hand you documents proving the whole deal is a massive fraud and the investor is a fugitive criminal. You'll get the exclusive. But you must promise to give me a signal when you're ready to move. Grayson was silent for a few seconds, digesting the information. This smelled not just of an article, but of a true sensation. All right. I'll be there. How will you pass the documents and what's the signal? I'll find you there. Be ready to start filming at any moment, Jessica said, and hung up. She and Richard acted with utmost caution. Short calls from different numbers. Encoded messages. But they failed to account for one thing. They underestimated Elizabeth's animal, maternal instinct. From the start she sensed something had changed. After Jessica's visit, her husband became different. He grew quiet, withdrawn. He often went to his study and sat there alone for long stretches. He stopped joining her rapturous monologues about Nathan's brilliance. When she began to praise her son and his grand plans, Richard would simply get up and leave, citing a headache. At first Elizabeth chalked it up to stress. But then she began to notice details. She noticed how he flinched when the phone rang and went to another room to talk. She saw how he quickly hid some papers in the safe when she entered the study. He had become secretive, nervous. And it had all begun right after Jessica's visit. Suspicion, like poisonous ivy, began to coil around her heart. That wretch, that daughter-in-law, was up to something. And she had dragged her husband into it. Elizabeth didn't know exactly what they were plotting, but she was sure it was something against her darling boy. She saw how her son had been glowing in recent days, how he was preparing for his triumph, and her mother's intuition screamed that clouds were gathering over him. She started to watch. She became a shadow in her own home. She listened at the door to his phone calls. But he spoke in riddles, some projects and documents. She tried to peek into his study, but he had begun locking the door, something he had never done before. Her anxiety grew with each passing day. She saw that Richard hadn't merely withdrawn. He was in collusion with her chief enemy, with the woman who had tried to destroy their family. The thought that her own husband could betray her and their son was unbearable, but the facts spoke for themselves. The denouement came the day before the press conference. In the evening, Richard was again on the phone in his study. Elizabeth, as usual, stood outside the door, trying to make out the words. "Yes, Jessica, everything stands," she heard her husband's muffled voice. "Tomorrow at 10. I'll be there. The main thing is that you're not late. And is the journalist ready?" Everything clicked in Elizabeth's head at once. Tomorrow at 10, the time of Nathan's press conference. They were going to sabotage it. They were planning some kind of subversion. That wretch Jessica and her traitor husband wanted to publicly humiliate her son on the most important day of his life. "Yes, I understand. No, she doesn't know anything. And she won't. I'll do everything to shield her from this. She'll think it's just business disagreements. Until tomorrow." Richard hung up. Elizabeth recoiled from the door. Blood pounded in her temples. So that's it. They didn't just want to wreck the deal. They were hiding something from her. Something so terrible that, in their view, she had to be protected from it. They thought of her as a weak, foolish old woman who could be deceived. Rage, cold and pure, drove out fear. She would not allow it. She would not let them destroy her boy. She didn't know all the details of their insidious plan, but she knew the main thing: they were going to strike tomorrow. And she would be there to stop them. She would defend her son at any cost. The morning of the press conference was clear and cold. Jessica had not slept all night, replaying her plan over and over in her mind. She dressed simply but severely: dark trousers, a white shirt, a tailored jacket. Not clothes for a celebration. A uniform for war. In her bag lay a folder with copies of all the documents: the agreement with Coleman, the printed wanted notice, the Cayman Islands account transactions, and, most important, the insurance policy. The Panorama Hotel buzzed like a hive. TV vans lined the entrance, and the lobby swarmed with people in expensive suits. The entire local elite had come to witness the Harrisons' triumph. Jessica entered through the service entrance, as Richard had instructed. He waited for her in a small, stuffy utility room next to the main hall. Thomas Grayson, the journalist, was there too, eyes alight with impatience. "Everything's ready," Richard said quietly. His face was pale but resolute. "He's about to start speaking. As soon as he picks up the pen to sign the contract, we go out. My camera is on and feeding to the newsroom. They're ready to go live at any second," Grayson added. Through the thin wall came a hum of voices, then applause. And Nathan's voice began to sound. Confident, charismatic, flowing from speakers installed even in the corridor. Jessica listened to his speech, and each word was like poison. He spoke of legacy, of hardships overcome, of devotion to family and the business. He thanked his father for wisdom and support. He thanked his mother for her faith in him. He presented to the audience the brilliant financier and our new partner, Christopher Coleman, and his charming niece Monica, who sat beside him on the stage, radiant with happiness. Jessica stood with fists clenched and waited. She looked at Richard. He stood with his head lowered, listening to his son's lies. In that moment he looked truly old. "And now the historic moment has come," Nathan proclaimed solemnly. "A moment that will define the Harrison factory's future for decades. We are ready to sign the contract that will be the symbol of our rebirth." Applause broke out again in the hall. "It's time," Richard whispered and stepped toward the door. But before he could touch the handle, the door flew open on its own. Elizabeth stood on the threshold. She wore her best suit, bright makeup on her face. Her hair was perfectly set. She looked like a guest at a celebration. But her eyes in them burned an icy fire. She didn't look at Richard or at the journalist. All her anger, all her hatred were aimed at Jessica. "I know what you're doing," she hissed, metal ringing in her voice. Richard froze, horror twisting his face. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" "Leave. I'm not going anywhere." She stepped forward, blocking the exit with her body. I won't let you, she jabbed a finger toward Jessica, "destroy my son. Shame him before the whole city." Grayson backed away, instinctively shielding his camera. He hadn't expected this turn. The situation was slipping out of control. "Elizabeth, you don't understand," Richard began, trying to approach her. "You're the one who doesn't understand," she cut him off, never taking her eyes off Jessica. "I heard everything. You dragged him into your filthy conspiracy. You want to sabotage the most important deal of his life over your petty female revenge. I saw how he worked, how he stayed up nights to save us all. And you want to destroy everything." She was like a tigress defending her cub. Blind, furious, ungovernable. No argument would sway her. "Get out, both of you." She shifted her gaze to Grayson. "Or I will start screaming right now. I will scream loud enough for the whole hall to hear. I'll tell everyone that saboteurs are hiding here, preparing a provocation. I'll tell how the ex-wife, out of jealousy, is trying to sink the family business. And they'll believe me, the mother, over you." It was a direct threat. And it was real. One scream from her, and their plan would collapse. Security would throw them out, and Nathan would emerge the winner, the victim of a devious plot. He could even sue them. Jessica looked at this enraged woman standing in her way like a living wall. There was no time. Beyond the door, Nathan was already taking the pen in hand. A few more seconds and it would be over. Richard stood paralyzed by horror and despair, unable to say a word to his wife. All hope rested on him, on his authority. But he was silent. He couldn't choose between a criminal son and a fanatical wife. And at this critical moment he was weak again. Elizabeth saw their confusion. A triumphant, vicious smile appeared on her face. She was winning. She was saving her boy once again. She squared her shoulders, ready to deliver a final, humiliating speech before driving them out. She was so certain of her rightness, of her power. She was ready to die for her son, but she was not ready to learn the truth about him. And that was exactly what destroyed her. Jessica looked at Elizabeth's triumphant face, then at Richard, frozen. She realized persuasion was useless. The woman's mind was sealed by maternal love, and there was no breaking that armor with words. But perhaps it could be pierced by a fact. One, irrefutable, killing fact. She didn't argue. She didn't shout back. She quietly opened her bag and took out the last, most terrifying document from the folder. A copy of the insurance policy. She stepped up to Elizabeth and held out the sheet of paper. Elizabeth looked at the paper with contempt. "What fresh forgery is this? You think I'll believe your scraps?" "I'm not asking you to believe me," Jessica said softly, but loud enough for Richard to hear. Her voice did not tremble. "Just look at the date. In the upper left corner." Curiosity, mingled with arrogance, got the better of her. Elizabeth snatched the sheet as if to tear it triumphantly. But before she could, her eyes caught the lines. She brought the paper closer to her face. She saw her own name in the line "Emergency Contact." She saw Nathan's name in the beneficiary field and Jessica's name in the insured field. And then she saw the date. The date the policy was issued. Year, month, day. In that instant, absolute silence fell in the small utility room. Only the renewed applause beyond the wall could be heard. Nathan had apparently made a dramatic pause before signing. But for Elizabeth, the entire world narrowed to that single date. She stared at it, and her mind, trained for years to justify and defend her son, began to race feverishly. That date was a year earlier than when Nathan met Monica. Half a year earlier than the factory's financial troubles began. Long before this whole nightmare. In a single moment her neat, convenient worldview collapsed. The entire story she had been telling herself crumbled to dust. The affair with Monica wasn't a desperate step to save the business. It was just a stage of the plan. The financial crisis wasn't a misfortune that befell them. It was a carefully plotted sabotage. Her love, her readiness to do anything for her son, her fake heart attack, her lies, her hatred of Jessica, all of it had not been her own choice. All of it had been merely a tool in his hands. He had used her blind devotion as coolly as he used shell companies. He wasn't saving the family. He was methodically destroying it. And all this time, while she worshipped him, he was preparing the murder of the woman who slept in the same bed with him. Not out of love for another, not in a fit of passion, but by cold, cynical calculation. Elizabeth's face changed before their eyes. The color drained from it, leaving a deathly pallor. Her bright lips began to tremble. The triumph in her eyes gave way first to bewilderment, then to horror, and then to something far more terrible. All her boundless, all-consuming maternal love burned out in a second, turning into its opposite, an icy, scorching fury. The fury of a deceived woman betrayed by the dearest person in the world. She understood that she had been defending not a genius and savior, but a cold-blooded monster. She clenched the insurance policy in her hand. She didn't look at Jessica or at her petrified husband. She turned. Her movements became sharp, honed. She shoved the door and stepped out of the utility room, emerging at the edge of the stage. Jessica, Richard, and Grayson froze, not understanding what she was about to do. "Roll," Jessica whispered to the journalist. Nathan stood at center stage behind the lectern, pen in hand, posing for the cameras. He was wearing his most charming smile. He could already taste victory. And so, he began, bringing the pen to the paper, and at that moment he saw his mother. She was walking straight toward him, determined, eyes blazing, with an expression he had never seen in his life. "Mom?" He smiled in surprise. "Did you decide to congratulate me in person?" She came right up to him. She said nothing. She simply took the microphone from his hand. Nathan's face twisted, his smile slid away. He tried to say something, but she had already turned to the hall. The hall fell silent. Everyone watched this strange scene. Elizabeth Harrison swept her gaze over the cameras, the guests' faces, Monica's radiant face, Coleman's bewildered one. She took a deep breath. "Good afternoon." Her voice, amplified by the speakers, rang surprisingly firm and clear. "My name is Elizabeth Harrison. I am the mother of this man." She nodded toward Nathan, petrified with shock. "My son has told you a beautiful story today about saving our family business. About legacy and honor. But he forgot to mention a few important details." She paused. Dead silence reigned in the hall. You could have heard a fly pass. And I think you'll be interested to hear them. Elizabeth stood before the silent hall, and in that moment she was not merely a mother. She was judge, prosecutor, and executioner in one. Her amplified voice sliced the quiet like a scalpel. "The first thing he forgot to tell you is that there was no financial crisis at our factory," she began, each word like a hammer blow. "The crisis was created artificially. By my son, Nathan Harrison. For 6 months he siphoned company funds to shell accounts, deliberately driving it toward bankruptcy so he could then appear as the savior." Nathan seemed to stop breathing. He stared at his mother in horror and incomprehension, like a child suddenly struck by the closest person to him. He mumbled something, reached out to take back the microphone, but Elizabeth stepped back, never taking her burning eyes off him. The second thing he omitted. "This so-called investor, Mr. Coleman," she gestured toward the pale, sweating swindler, "is not a brilliant financier, but a common criminal on the federal wanted list for large-scale fraud. Their plan was to stage this performance for you, announce a sham contract, and finish looting what remained of our factory." At that moment Richard, as if waking from a trance, stepped out from the wings. He approached the stunned Thomas Grayson and silently handed him a folder with a copy of the investment agreement. The journalist snatched it, and his camera immediately focused on the pages of the document. The live broadcast continued. Coleman realized the game was up. He leapt from his seat and bolted for the exit. But it was too late. Two men in police uniforms were already at the doors. Apparently, Detective McCormick, having received a signal from Grayson, was acting with surprising speed. Coleman was pinned and led out to the click of shutters. Monica cried out and tried to run too, but Elizabeth stopped her with her voice. And this girl, Monica Ross, is not merely the niece of a criminal. She is his accomplice. And the mistress of my son, for whose sake he betrayed his wife and his family. All eyes turned to Monica. She froze like a trapped creature, then covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Nathan stood in the middle of the stage, utterly crushed. His world was collapsing live on air. His perfect plan, his future, his reputation, everything was turning to ash, and the one setting the fire was his own mother. But that's not all, Elizabeth went on, and her voice quavered. A terrible personal pain entered it. All this lying wasn't just for the money. My son had another plan, more frightening. She raised a crumpled sheet of paper. The insurance policy. This is insurance. On his wife Jessica's life. For millions of dollars. Taken out long before any of these events. Apparently a plundered factory and stolen money weren't enough for him. She spoke, then turned to Nathan. She looked at him no longer with fury, but with endless, icy emptiness. As if she were looking at a stranger. I was an accomplice to his lies, she said quietly yet distinctly, addressing the entire hall. I lied to protect him. I staged a heart attack to paint his wife as guilty. I loved him so much I was blind. But I will not be an accomplice to murder. She dropped the microphone. The loud thud echoed through the dead silence of the hall. She turned and walked off the stage without looking at anyone. She moved like an automaton, back straight, and in that moment she was the strongest and most miserable woman in the world. She had destroyed her son to save his soul from the last sin, and in destroying him she had destroyed herself. Jessica watched it all from the shadows and the wings. She felt no triumph. No joy of vengeance. Only a quiet, bitter weight. The war was over. She had won. But the price of that victory was enormous. Nathan was arrested right on stage. He didn't resist. He simply stood with empty eyes while the cuffs clicked on his wrists. The scandal was colossal. It thundered across the country. The Harrison name became a byword for a grand deception. But through the mud and shame another story emerged. The story of a woman who did not give up. Who stood against everyone and managed not only to survive but to reclaim what was hers. The factory was saved. Jessica, using what funds remained and taking full control, was able to prove that the company itself had been the victim of fraud. Old debts were restructured. Thanks to the media furor, real investors appeared, those who believed not in grand words, but in a woman with a spine of steel who had single-handedly won a war. Richard withdrew from business entirely, living out his days quietly in the shadow of his son's disgrace and beside his silent, broken wife. Jessica never spoke to Elizabeth again. A chasm lay between them that nothing could ever fill. Half a year passed. Jessica sat in the office she had once shared with Nathan. Now it was hers alone. It had been remade, become the real thing. Not as big as Nathan's con had promised, but honest and profitable. She signed it with her firm, confident signature. Then she stood and walked to the huge window that looked out over the factory yard. The workshops were running, machines humming, workers moving about. Her father's life's work lived on. It had been saved. In the eyes of the whole city, she was no longer the cheated wife. She was the owner. The head of the Harrison Empire. A new, formidable, unshakable head of the family. She had paid a terrible price for it, losing love, faith, and family. But she had gained something more important. She had found herself. And she was ready to begin a new life. Her life. That's how this story ends. Heavy, isn't it? A story with no easy answers and no unequivocally happy ending. Jessica won, she reclaimed everything and more. But at what cost? She remained alone, amid the ruins of her family, surrounded by betrayal. Can we call that a true victory? You know, I keep thinking about Elizabeth. Her final act on that stage, what was it? Redemption? A desperate attempt to save at least the family's honor, since she couldn't save her son? Or was it the terrible revenge of a woman whose chief illusion, her reason for living, had been taken from her? She destroyed Nathan, but in doing so, she destroyed herself. Please write in the comments how you view her action. I'm very interested in your opinion. And the men in this story? Richard, who chose shameful silence over an old secret. Matthew, who betrayed his sister out of fear and weakness. Can they be understood or forgiven? This story leaves many questions, and I'll be glad to discuss them with you in the comments. If it moved you, if it made you think, please like this video. Your support is very important to our channel. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new, equally gripping stories. We work hard for you. All the very best to you. At the end of this video, a window will appear in the middle of the screen. Please click it. There you'll find more of our most interesting stories. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Until next time.